So we're going to do a formal welcome. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's author talk. And through the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation, my name is Susan Barber, and I coordinate these author talks for the foundation. And I would encourage you to put up in the chat where it is that you are zooming in from. That's always fascinating to know where people are coming from. And what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to briefly introduce the foundation for those of you that may be unfamiliar with us. And then I will be introducing Pema and Yuka-san just briefly so that they are able to go ahead and introduce themselves, talk about this beautiful book. The Petunias are doing amazing, and Pema's experience as an incarcerated person and a gardener and about life. One of the things that I am just so grateful for is a piece that is going to be read later that Pema wrote while incarcerated about work she was doing to bring some comfort to people that were dying in the prison she was at, and trying to set up a hospice-like program. And we were just talking about the work that we're doing at Humane Prison Hospice Project, which is my day job, where we finally partnered with the California Department of Corrections. And we are moving forward, working with them to bring hospice training into 2 prisons in 2023 as sort of beta test to see how we can do. So just very grateful, Pema, for the work that you tried to do just by yourself, trying to support your peers. And at Humane, our goal is to train incarcerated people to provide care for their peers because they will be able to do the best job. So thank you for those of you. We have people from India with us tonight, Emerald Hills, which is my old stomping ground, San Mateo County, Maryland, Venice, Florida. I am this evening also in Florida. I am in Jupiter, Florida. And I just so appreciate all of you from the East Coast and other points coming to join us so late. This is the first time I've been on the East Coast while we've been hosting one of these events, and 5 p.m. sounds great if you're in California, but 8 o'clock, that's a lot. That's a heavy lift. So thank you all. So without too much further ado, I am going to go ahead and introduce the foundation for those of you that may be joining us for the first time. The Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation is a not-for-profit organization inspired by the life of psychiatrist, humanitarian, and hospice pioneer Dr. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross. It's in the spirit of embracing all of life, which includes death, that we further her mission and her vision through collaborations, education, and advocacy. And this evening, we are doing this by way of advocacy. And to introduce Shea Pema Tenzin, was born in 1978 and raised in rural Sugartown, Louisiana, by her mama, a full-blooded Choctaw. In her teen years, she endured violent homophobia and transphobia. She moved to New York with a modeling contract at age 17. In 1999, she was raped on a job in Chicago and retaliated in self-defense, which resulted in a 23-year sentence. While incarcerated, she became a formal student of Tibetan Buddhism and continues her studies. She went on to earn a BA in sociology and an MA in religion. She also began contemplative care training with I'm going to have to ask for permission to mispronounce this, Udambrara Zen Center, and in 2018 was ordained as a chaplain. She began offering hospice care at the prison, which led the Buddhist services and co-founded the Interfaith Council. For several years, Pema has also guided a popular meditation class of 50 people. And in 2020, with Yuka-san Stevens, she co-founded the Inside Out Study Group. Pema was released in July 2022 and is currently living in a stable home, working and speaking publicly about trans violence and re-entry education. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. Yuka-san Stevens is a formal student and chaplain intern with the New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care. In 2017, she responded to a letter Pema wrote to the Zen Center, and their friendship grew. In 2020, they co-founded the Inside Out Study Group, which fosters spiritual and emotional connection through prison walls via study, contemplation, and communication. In 2021, they published The Petunias Are Doing Amazing, a prison journal and plant care guide, for which she served as editor. She is currently serving as chaplain at a New York State Correctional Center. And I had the pleasure of meeting Yuka-san earlier this year. I'm going to bring you both down here into the spotlight when we were fortunate enough, the Humane Prison Project was fortunate enough to work with the New York City Zen Center for Contemplative Care, and Yucatan organized that event for us. So thank you both so much. And at this point, I am going to ask people just to be conscious about keeping yourself muted. And I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and turn the program over to the both of you. So thank you so much. There will be time for questions and answers, and you're welcome to put questions up in the chat. I'll be monitoring them. And Yuka-san and Pema, however, whatever feels best for you, if it feels best to stop and address questions as they come up, or we can just save the last half hour. We would have about 50 minutes, 60 minutes, 50 or 60 minutes now. We save the last half hour for questions and whatever works best for you. So please do put your questions up in the chat as they come up, and we'll answer them at some point. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Pema, let's get started.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was waiting for you.
No.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shay Pemmiton Zen. As she said, I grew up in a very small town in Louisiana. I think the population at the time was a whopping 350 people. Moved to New York City to model. And in 1999, I was sent to Chicago. And I was attacked, brought back. Didn't matter that the guy had been in prison for rape. Didn't matter. I didn't even have a parking ticket. It was queer folk that were off of the street. And that was enough. So I was sentenced to 23 years in prison. And I thought the horrors in 1999 or something. Man, I would like to write a letter to myself now. Prison hurts. Prison's scary. Prison is all those things that you think it is. And for somebody that's not violent, somebody that's just trying to survive, it's hell. So about the first 10 years that I was there, I was one of the most angry people that you can meet. I was frustrated. I felt thrown aside by the world, and the world was moving on without me. For what? And then finally, my mama, who was the rock of my entire foundation, she's sitting right behind me now, asked me, when are you going to bloom? When are you going to move past this? When are you going to grow? And I took it to heart. And in 2012, I started a horticulture program in prison. And that was my way to touch life again. And that class curriculum, it taught me things about myself and about life that I didn't even know. And it taught me how to connect back with life. So as part of the curriculum, we wrote brief reports about what was going on with our day. What did we view? What are our thoughts? So I would view, I would notate, I would sketch, and I would write. So the book that I'm about to read from today was never meant to be a book. It wasn't something huge and literary, but it's my thoughts. It was my thoughts about what I was experiencing. And it took Yaku-san, and I'll get to that later, to bring this to where it is today. And it's touched more lives than I ever knew possible. So if I can, I would like to read a few passages for you. And again, this isn't a great work of some literary art. This is my thoughts. This is my feelings. It's my emotions. They're sincere and they're genuine. So Would you like to say anything first?
Sure. I'll just say that Pema and I met through letter correspondence when Pema wrote to the Zen Center, and I was very interested in Pema's writing and expression, and it became, I really wanted to do a project with you, Pema. And you started sending me your essays and writing, and then one day you sent me these journals, and I really kind of knew then that it was a project in itself, difficult to accomplish through prison walls, and it would be a great way to also raise funds for your reentry. And I called another friend, Ruben, who's here on the call too, Ruben Lorch Miller, who is an artist and designer. And the three of us seeded this project, and now it's really blooming. So just wanted to introduce it like that, and there.
Thank you. What I'm going to be reading first, I should put my glasses on for, but it's a portion of the introduction, and this was written sometime later. I had sent the essays or the journal to Yakusan, and she says, well, we need something to start it with. We need something to, to introduce this. And so what I'm about to read is a portion of the intro. So here we go. It's called Getting My Hands Dirty. When I was first incarcerated in Cook County Jail in Chicago, I was hit by a very hard awakening. We weren't outside on the grass. In fact, the only time we got to go on outside was on the concrete patio 2 stories above the ground. 2 years and 4 months, I was forced to look at grass, and like freedom, it was just out of reach. I was later sentenced and sent to Joliet Prison, which is a receiving prison at the time. The first time I walked into the yard's grass, I immediately found a spot all to myself, and I remember so clearly sitting on that precious spot and running my fingers through the grass. I cried at the chance to touch something so wondrous, so alive. I heard a guy in the distance ask, what's wrong with him? And his companion said, he must have come from Cook County. Let him have some peace. Maybe it seems mundane, it's just grass. But to me, sitting there in that spot was a chance to be amidst life once more. So I memorized the texture and the feel of each blade as it caressed my palm. Swore never to take such a treasure for granted again. Have a window in my room that I could open and close. Sit on a desk nearby and look out for hours, imagining a walk through the trees. I watched the ground squirrels scamper about collecting food and playing. I watched as the eagles soared and over the trees, catching the currents of the wind. I may have moved to a different room or a different prison, but I would see life just beyond the screen of my window. Trees exploding with life in spring and summer, leaves turning colors, eventually falling in autumn. Year after year, the seasons change. I watch as life seems to move along without me, stuck in this 3-foot by 10-foot room. I need this connection with nature, only to remember my humanity. Like the TV I purchased, the window shows me there's still life out there. So I look forward to meal and yard times, to the moments I can walk outside and finally feel a part of something larger than myself. There's a small lake just beyond the fence. go and sit on a grassy knoll and watch the Canada geese swim in the water. Most times, I have to dodge their poop on the yard. Yes, the geese thought our side of the fence was greener. I had taken for granted what being outside truly is until it was taken away from me. Now when I feel the sunlight hit my skin, feel the wind as it whisks by, the softness of the grass underfoot, everything seems so right. Again, a brief reading and basically just explaining a bit of thought and emotion. The next is called, it's part of the journal. And at first I didn't really know how I was going to structure the journal that I was writing. So I would write about each plant and I would annotate the things that I'd learned. Later I changed that, but here in the beginning, it's different. And the portion I'm going to read right now is about the Christmas tree cactus from 10/10/2012. When I first took control of the plant, it was in a state of almost permanent wilt. I've given it plenty of water, shade, and care. It responded quite well. Fertilized it on 8/16/22 and again on 9/20/12. The color of the stalk and the leaves are really vibrant. I'm interested to see what will happen since I took the shade flaps down today. Still in partial shade, but way more light than it previously did. So, a state of permanent wilt. My instructor, Doug, would never say that something was dead. It was always in a state of permanent wilt, which they never returned from. But the phrase stuck with me just the same. One of the things that I was given was my own section in the greenhouse. It was in a U shape. They had flaps that would block the sun. And I had plants surrounding me. Each plant represented a person in my life, family member, a loved one. I had one from monastics, because it was at that point that I was beginning in the early stages of my Buddhist path. And I would go, I would just look at plants. I would sit, I would meditate, and I would spend each day, each time I could, just saying hi to my friends. And I couldn't make my mama something to eat or take a friend some cookies, but I could show this plant some love, give it some water, fertilizer, and felt like I was doing something. The next portion was page 18. Yaku-san and I talked about this passage, and I think I was more in favor of it than she, but there's a reason. This is from page 18, where I started to structure things a bit different. And it's just the first paragraph from November 2nd, 2012. Today is our last day of class for 10 days. Place loads of pterosaur in almost all of the plants to try to save them from getting dehydrated. I have a few plants I'm concerned about, the seedling Petunias, the lettuce, and my Mycolochus. But I'm certain, even though Doug isn't very optimistic, that I've provided enough hydration to keep them in permanent wilt. Use that phrase again. I guess time will tell. These plants weren't plants to me. They were family. They were people in my life, as I've said, but I was in a very violent place, a very violent prison. Officers were getting stabbed and assaulted, inmates same. And we would go on lockdown, and for me, that meant that I was stuck in this room for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, not leave. till they deemed safe for everyone to return back to normality. I had lost my grip on life because I had went to prison, because I was giving up. And there was a time that I had really thought, maybe I should just end it. Maybe I should just give up. This class brought me back because it showed me that there was life still, and that I was able to touch and affect lives, even if I wasn't there. So when we would go on these lockdowns, it was really upsetting for me because I feared for the life of the plants. There are a few things like tomato plants and things of that nature that need, or lettuce specifically, that needs water constantly. It's made up of a majority of water. Survive would worry. And so the reason I wanted to read that was to point out that the fact of what a lockdown is, or what it does to a person's heart or their mind, and yeah. Next to page 65. Again, Yaktus and I consulted over this, and Yaks won, but we won't hold it against you. This is the very last portion, and I'm going to read the entry in its entirety on page 65 from March 5th, 2013. Today is going to be my final entry to the journal. The class is ending in 2 weeks, and everything I'm doing is mainly immediate care. There have been many, many surprises that have come my way since I started in the greenhouse. My petunias have been one of the biggest bloomers I've ever planted. Flowers are so beautiful and robust. The plants have at least 40 blooms on each of them. Blooms are huge and awesome. The burl's tail is finally flowering. Bloom is yellow, pink pistil. The tomatoes are so tall, and they're producing baby tomatoes like crazy. I'm proud because of these plants. For the tomato, I harvested the seed, cleaned it, I dried it, and I finally planted it. The burro's tail I took over when I got here. It was in a small dry cell, and I replanted it, gave it great care. Thus it gave back to me greatly for the care it was given. The phlox and alyssum are blooming like crazy. The window box with the two in it is really beautiful. The alyssum is a deep purple and white, and the phlox is a light, vibrant purple. The two other phlox are blooming at an amazing rate too. And the amaryllis is starting to bud. Stalks are growing, and I might see them bloom before we leave. I could go on all day about my plant babies, the care I've given them, and the results that they've given me. But my time is coming to an end. I finally have to stop it somewhere. I've learned far more than I ever thought possible. Touching the life of plants has forever enriched my life. Forever thankful. Found my Buddhist path in the life of these plants. And I just want to say that I'm changed in ways that I never knew achievable. May the precious Buddha mind that is not yet arisen arise and grow. May that which is born have no decline, increase forever. Minus the sketches in the intro in that book. That was all written in 2012 and 2013. The sketches and the intro were added when Yakusan and I and Ruben started working together to bring this compilation together. As Jacques had said, she had encouraged me through the beginning of our relationship to write. You gotta write, you gotta write. And I got really upset with her because I finally started writing. I was like, I don't know what you want me to say. I don't know how to just write. So she would send me prompts. And what about this? Well, this is interesting. What do you think about this? And how does this work? And as somebody on the outside, I would really like to know about this. And so I would sit, I would write. And this went on for about 4 months. And I had sent her huge packets of things that I sat and I handwrote. Then in December, I sent her the plant journal. She's like, oh, no, this is what we're publishing. She said, I think this is what needs to go out. I think she was right. That class wasn't just a horticulture class in a college program in another penal institution. It was through the lives of those plants, through that curriculum and that amazing instructor, that I was able to find my life again. I was able to find purpose in my life again. And it later led me to hospice. The things that one of the prompts that Yax had sent me, I call her Yax. Everybody will probably hate it. It's pronounced Yaku-san, but she's Yax to me. She had sent me a prompt about hospice. She was starting in, doing her training in chaplaincy, and contemplative care is a huge part of a Buddhist practice for the most part. She would ask me about hospice and I would dodge it. Because, this is years later after I've written this. And I had worked through my master's. I was ordained and I was sitting as a hospice volunteer. And sometimes there were days that I would work a 14 or 16-hour day. I would go home to my room after a shower. They would come and knock on my door and say, hey, you got to go to the healthcare. There's somebody that needs to talk to you. Or there's somebody on suicide watch. You need to go and see them. I would never complain. I would never say, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm too tired. I've worked all day. Haven't I done enough? Get up and I'll go. Because it meant something. And you'll understand in cold room. And when Yaku-san would ask, it would bring up a lot of feelings that I didn't really want to talk about. I didn't really want to address, because to me, hospice is something sacred. When you sit with somebody in the last moments of their life, you're given a gift. They give you a piece of them because they know that life as they know it right now is coming to an end. And it seems that people at that point in their life just really want to give back. So she finally asked me one last time about hospice. And I wrote the last thing that I'm going to read to you tonight. And it's called Cold Room. And I still get emotional. I practiced it like 3 times today and I still get emotional. Apologize for the tears if there are some. We'll get through it together, I think, right? This is called Cold Room. And this was one of the things that I had sent Yax to start a compilation of writings for a book. And he saved it. And it looks like it's going to be a book. So I'm really excited about it. Please try to understand what I'm about to read to you, because it's very important. Cold Room. I've described briefly before the circumstances around the terminal, dying. I don't feel I've adequately described the totality of it all, though. So I'd like to take this time to do that now. Imagine, if you can, being told you were dying in prison. You'll never go home to your family, play with your children, hold your loved ones ever again. Once medical staff deems that you are close to your end, they place you in a room alone, so that when you finally pass, no one, meaning individuals incarcerated, can be blamed for your death. The room is cold cement, paint peeling from the walls. Windows looking outside, it's screwed shut. In front of this room is a half wall of windows facing the nurses' station. through this window. Though there's a window there, most staff act as if they can't see you. You're trapped in a tomb before you even have a chance to die. You're lying in a bed, listening to machines that are assisting your life, waiting for your end to come. How do I know these things? I spent time in the death room after I came back from a surgery. Felt so lonely, so alone. And this is no way to die. Not if there's another option. My heart screamed for me to take action. I saw the conditions and the way these guys were treated. I was experiencing my own mother's illness and possible death. I was helpless to help her, but at least I wasn't helpless. At least I was helpless to help her physically. I can only imagine the families of these guys that they felt knowing their loved one would never come home. I had to take action. There was someone sitting with my mama, and that brought me some solace. Sitting with their loved ones would bring families some peace. Then who was I to turn away from that need? I'll speak about two people that touched my life specifically. Let's call them Mr. Manning and Mr. Robinson. Maybe through sharing of these experiences, maybe you'll be able to see and fully understand how life is for these guys. It should be noted that I don't think staff's indifference to these guys was them being evil to the dying. I think people are genuinely afraid of death and avoid anyone dying at all costs. Pretending they don't see them standing at a window with loneliness in their eyes was their way of finding distance to protect themselves. When I first met Mr. Manning, I had just come home from an appendectomy. And I say home, it was prison. I was in a wheelchair and I saw this older Black gentleman in what I could only describe of as an adult high chair. He had fallen in the infirmary and had shattered both of his hips. Mr. Manning was strapped in this chair, but he was so drugged that he couldn't even try to get out of it if he wanted to. He was just left there in the hospital gown, hospital socks, and what was left of his dignity. Food trailed from his mouth down his gown onto the tray that was placed in front of him. He was trying to eat, but the drugs wouldn't allow his motor skills to work properly. I asked if I could have a plastic sport, and he handed it to me. I began feeding him. It was slow going, but more food was going into his mouth than what ended up on his gown. A nurse passed by and she gave me an evil glare and said, "You better take your shower. You don't have time to be babying him." I was surprised by her venom, but responded, "That's fine. Thanks." And continued. She walked off in a huff, and I cared for Mr. Manning until I had to leave the infirmary and go back into population. I would travel with the chaplain at the time as a volunteer. I was actually hired for the position of chaplaincy clerk sometime later. Every week, I would go and check on Mr. Manning. The chaplain would make his rounds, but I sat with Mr. Manning. In his lucid moments, Mr. Manning would talk to me about home that he would never go to. Strangely enough, he was from Louisiana, so we found a kinship. I would listen to his stories and laugh with him over the silly things. Every week, Mr. Manning would light up whenever I showed up. The nurse now over the infirmary said he waits all week just so he can see you and talk. But this wasn't enough. I needed to be able to come at least 3 or 4 times a week. How was one day for hours enough? I pushed and had staff's assistance and finally was made an unofficial hospice volunteer. They didn't have a clear plan of action, but I was allowed to come over and be assigned patients. This was IDOC's way of allowing a service because it was dearly needed, but not owning responsibility for it. I was fully aware that if a patient died while I was in the room, I was subject to investigation. I would go to SEG until the coroner's report came back. And you know what? I didn't care. I was needed and I would be there. Service came too late for Mr. Manning, though. I wasn't able to get it all okay fast enough to benefit. And I'll carry me with that until the day I die. The last person I will share with you about, and I will get emotional, is Mr. Robinson. I had met Mr. Robinson years before. Mr. Robinson was a very active older guy. Anytime you saw him, he was busy. Mr. Robinson wouldn't go for activities past his time at recreation or at day room. Instead, he would always be seen at a table helping guys with math. Mr. Robinson was the teacher's aide for a vocational program the college offered, yet he helped guys in his free time work on their GED and an ABE, which is adult basic education, on those programs on the wing. I never asked him or anyone what they're incarcerated for because it's none of my business. I wanted to see that person that was before me, not the crime that they committed or anything else. And every time I saw Mr. Robinson, he had a ready smile and would be asking someone if they needed help. Mr. Robinson had disappeared for a while, and I heard that he had been taken to the outside hospital for some reason. He wasn't able to go to the outside hospital for anything small. I was notified later that I had a patient to go and see. So imagine my surprise and heartbreak to see Mr. Robinson again. When I saw him first, he was sitting in a wheelchair, totally lost. He had always been a very thin person, but now he was so swollen. His skin was barely containing it. I later found out that he had some sort of liver failure. It wouldn't be very long for him, so I got to work quickly. I sat with him and helped him write letters to his family. I spoke with him about religion. I mostly just tried to make him feel that he wasn't alone. I'd gotten guys to make and sign cards for Mr. Robinson. Guys wrote small messages letting him know their test results from that day at school or what his help had meant to them. One Sunday afternoon, I took those cards to Mr. Robinson. Sorry. He read them, and a tear slid down his face. As he looked through each one, he asked me for an Ensure because he hadn't eaten that day, and an aspirin because he had a headache. I quickly went to the nurse, a nurse that was very unpleasant. She was working a double shift, and she let everyone know that she wasn't happy about it. The nurse looked at me, when I brought her the request, and said, "No, you can talk to the doctor in the morning if he survives." Why? What difference did it make to her? He wasn't asking for morphine or some other drug. He was dying and in pain. Where was her humanity? I went back and let him know that what she had said, and that he'd have to wait until the morning to see the doctor. He smiled and squeezed my hand and said, "It's okay." He sat for another hour before I had to go back to work. Excuse me. Monday morning, came into work, and I started on paperwork. There was a huge stack in my inbox. I was the chaplaincy clerk now, and I was always busy with something usually. The chaplain came in, sat down, and said, "We need to talk." I was afraid the nurse had made some problems for me for asking about the medication. I readied myself for the blow, and chaplain said, Mr. Robinson passed away. 7:15 a.m. Tears fell down my face immediately. I had failed him. In his last hours, I couldn't help him with his pain. I was totally distraught. See, I never learned how to be with them while they were here. Let them go when they leave this earth. Time a patient dies, my heart breaks. And they take a small piece of me when they go. Didn't know how to disconnect. Never was taught. And I give my heart, it's all away or not at all. Make no mistake about it. I gave my heart to each one of those patients. No matter how cranky or upset they are, who wouldn't be in those conditions? Gave them love. I gave them attention. When they go, give them a piece of me. I don't speak much about my patients. I may share small stories if I feel it will help show a point I'm trying to make. But see, each patient, they're precious to me. These patients deserve honor and respect and dignity. And I feel like I'm selling their stories if I talk. I feel like I'm boasting or bragging when I speak of what I do. But to be clear, there's nothing glamorous about hospice. I don't want to make myself seem like I'm anything I'm not. All I want to be is of service to those that have no one. Someone sat with my mama and showed her love and compassion in her last. How could I do any less for these guys that are all alone? Yucks.
Mm.
I'm gonna ruin my makeup.
Yeah, well, I didn't even bring tissues, okay? I had to just
Prepare.
wipe it off with my hand or something. I'm just sending you a big hug right now. That is a truly beautiful essay. It's so heartfelt. And when I read that essay, it was pretty much like hearing it just now. I was just like, wow, this is it. This is real human to human connection across any divisions. And then I got really excited and was dancing all over the living room. That's what happened. And I really, when I when I read your plant journal, I read the first entry, and the first line of the first entry says, when I first took control of the plant, it was in a state of almost permanent wilt. And to me, that just said it all. I thought you were speaking perhaps about yourself or the people around you incarcerated, or anyone suffering really to that in that depth. And then in the journal, these plants come to life. Sometimes they die. And I just found the whole journal to be such a metaphor for your life and all lives. And so then when I read The Cold Room, it just seems like such an extension of the care that how care can really be penetrating. So
Yeah, so one of the things that I would like, if you guys have a question, um, I want to answer as many as possible. Um, just know that if I don't get to a question, I'll do my best to try to figure out a way to make it so at some point. And yeah, you're snotting too. Stop it.
Yeah, so
Gosh.
I want to just say I thank you both so very much. So beautiful to listen to the writing you've done and the people that you honored. And somebody in the audience suggests that we might want to just sit together quietly with the weight of that and the understanding that there are thousands of people right this moment in prisons around the country. There's probably tens of thousands around the world who are sick and who may be dying, who may have somebody with them and who may not. But maybe just to take a moment, the merits of any benefit from this offering that we have this evening and all of these people who have come to hear, we sit quietly and just extend loving kindness perhaps to those folks. And then we'll come back for the questions and answers, or the questions, may not be answers. So we're just going to invite everybody. I wish I had a little bell. I don't. To just sit together for a moment or two. And when people are ready, we come back and rejoin this conversation. A question just came up here. This is a question that we are grappling with too, the folks at UMaine that are putting together this training for incarcerated people to care for their peers in prison is, outside volunteering, like in an outside hospice, this is trained volunteers for several decades. And there was sort of a built-in mechanism that they visit somebody that they may never have met prior to that assignment. And they have a relationship with that person for a number of days or weeks or months, perhaps. And that person dies, and the volunteer then has the volunteer coordinator to speak to sort of talk to other hospice volunteers about how they've managed these sorts of situations. They can take some time off. And those are things like in a prison hospice. That's not how that really works. You're caring for people that you may have lived with for years. You may be caring for somebody who was in your housing unit that you had meals with, that you know very well. And then that person dies, and then there's another person that you've lived with for 20 or 30 or 40 years that you've had meals with, and that person is dying, and there really isn't a break from that experience. And there's a question here, such important work, and this is heavy life work. What ways do you give yourself, and what ways or how do you give yourself respite and care and compassion for your own self?
Thank you for your question. I sit. Um, I take time for myself. I'll go and I'll sit outside, or I'll take a bike ride. But also, I listen to music and I talk to my plant. And still love plants, by the way. Oh, but I did want to say, um, when I first started, there was no set program, so there was no structure. There was this person is dying and this person is dying. And it doesn't matter if that person died, you still have to sit with this person. Now, at the end, before I left, they had a bit of a system where if someone loses a patient, then you set for, I think, 6 weeks before you get your next patient. So you have a chance to kind of reset your clock, because if, when you go into a prison hospice, it's the same as I would assume um, a hospice in society. You have to have your shit together. You have to have your head good, your head right, and your heart right before you step through those doors. Because if you don't, the second you cross that door, you're a disservice to the person you're going to see. So that's the point. Are there any more questions?
Thank you. Yeah, I want to also just put up, there is a question from James. Was gardening and documenting the gardening experience used as a way for you to survive your prison experience?
Thank you, James. Yes, in a lot of ways, yes. I was ready to give up, but I had no direction. I'm the type of person that I have to have a goal. I have to have some sort of direction that I'm working towards in order to meet that end. And it doesn't matter what else is going on either side of that. I have a focus. That's where I'm going. My focus at that time was getting through this gardening. I really wanted to understand the science behind it, not just you put a seed in the ground and watch it grow. I wanted to know um, it, the science in the ground and the chemistry that's involved in it. I wanted to know about the flux of the light and the red and the far red. I wanted to understand the minute details, and in understanding that, I was able to take another step that day, and then the next day, and then the next day, because it gave me something to drive towards.
Thank you so much. There's a question about where people can get the book. So do you want to
Yeah,
either of you have that handy that you want to put it up, or I can just put it up, a link for the book?
AmazingPetunias.com.
Yes, let me put this up in a moment here. Um, and if anybody would like to ask a question just by putting just raising their hand in the Zoom way, you can just click reactions at the bottom of the key. And here's where you can get the book. I just want to ask also, just to make sure people understand that any profits from this book are going to help you with your re-entry, which I'm curious if maybe you could say a few words about what it's like coming back out. And then we'll go back to the questions here. And I remember sitting around at San Quentin with Sandy, who's on this call here, one of the founders of the Maine Prison Hospice Project, and our colleague, Lady Bird, and we would go in and talk to the men. We would be there twice a month doing end-of-life training with them, even though there was no hospice program there. But they wanted to learn about these things as part of their peer counseling training. And we would say, the 2 hours that we're here each week are pretty much the 2 most honest hours of our week. There was no time for bullshit in that room, and those men would sit down and they would get down to business. And it was unlike I've gone through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. I spent a lot of time sitting in circles and sitting in rooms and sitting in groups and sitting in different things, therapy, all sorts of things where we were talking. But that experience was just singular in their determination to be of service to their fellow human beings. And I remember Sandy and Lady Bird and I would be like, this is the best 2 hours of a week. We can't wait to come in here and be with you all. And they cannot wait to get the hell out. So we would have this conversation every week about how they can't wait to get out. We can't wait to get in. But I know reentry is, for most people, just a gigantic culture shock. And I'm just curious if you could say a few words about what that experience has been like for you. And then I'll come back to some of these questions here.
This might be answered by actually answering one of the really great, amazing questions that I saw. how do you get your head right? How do you get yourself right? You get your heart right. Be able to help others amid the violence that surrounds you. You could ask a firefighter today, or a teacher, or hospice volunteer, or clergy member the same question. For them, it was a life choice. For me, there was no one else. I was chicken shit. I didn't want to do it. I was scared of it. I didn't want any part of it. There was nobody else. I had been practicing Buddhism for quite some time at that point, and when I first started going into volunteer hospice, and that helped me find ground, because through my practice, I've been able to find myself on a deeper level that I never knew was possible, and the value of quiet, which I didn't know for 23 years. It's hard when there's violence all around you to be able to find a light every day to wake up to look for something to brighten your day. Believe it or not, one of my favorite things is making people smile. And so if I can make people smile, then the world just wasn't so much of a bad place to be, right? So seeing those people smile that I would go and sit with, or later I ended up being a TA for that horticulture program, and I helped teach others, which is the very foundation of going on to teach, and as a peer educator, as a Buddhist practitioner. That was what gave me the forum to be where I am now. People see you. You may not think that they do, on both sides of the uniform. If you follow who you are, I was raped, I was beaten, I was about everything that you can think that is horrid that happens to people in prison. I've been through some of that. But you have to have some sense of who you are. You can't change who you are, the core of who you are, because if you do, then you're the same monster that people will try to make you sound like when you hear about the term prisoner, or inmate, or whatever term you care to use. So I was me, and it didn't matter how violent people are around me or were. I was who I was. I would give people gifts on Christmas and their birthdays, and I would make them cards and paint paintings for people. And I don't think I'm much different than anyone else. The theme of the compilation of writings I have right now is about how the spirit soars in spite of difficult circumstances. Theme that Yaku-san came up with. You find your path, you find your ground, and at some point you stand on your own 2 feet. I hope that answers.
Yeah, there's a question here. I heard Yaku-san say that the cold room is the seed for another book. Can you tell us about your next project? And then the next question is the cold room a book yet? So I'm just curious if there's anything that you're thinking about doing with that material.
So I'm taking meetings with publishers right now. Pretty excited about it. I have about, I think it's 500 and something pages written. to answer the question, it's not available as of today. But it's a compilation of thoughts, answering prompts that Yaku-san had sent, answering about, my life from the beginning, what I went through in prison, some of the things that you experience in prison, and basically trying to give an understanding. If I could find a reason to wake up and smile every day going through that absolute chaos, how much more could you? Yaku-san, do you want to add something about that?
Which part?
The cold room and the next compilation of writings, because you were integral in that whole process.
Yeah. There is a lot of, Pema has a lot of writing. And it can be taken in any direction, really. I mean, I personally feel that the cold room itself, as someone just suggested, could become an entire book. And so there's a lot of ways to go. Yeah. It's incredible to have such first, to have the perspective of someone who has spent so much time inside. The knowledge and the intimacy of that experience cannot be conveyed by someone studying through books, or someone coming, even as a worker coming in and out. So Pema's perspective is completely very particular. So,
Yeah.
I think you froze for me.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
Okay, the whole thing.
No,
Okay.
maybe just for me. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, she was really good. You were good for the rest of it.
Okay.
Okay.
We saw you all.
Yeah.
Somebody just, I think it's Shyam has said, what inner work you had to do to be able to find love amidst so much violence and hatred, which is prevalent in prison. And I'm curious, Emma, if maybe you could say something. Were you a Buddhist practitioner prior to going inside? Did that happen while you were incarcerated, and how did that happen? And I'm curious also, how did you know to reach out to Yucca-san with your writing? And to also, before we're over, want to talk a little bit about the Inside Outside project and how that works. So maybe we could start with that, and then we'll come back and we have Sandy's question here that we'll come back to.
So one of the things, I wasn't a Buddhist practitioner going into prison. I'm very vocal. I went through a lot with the Christian community that I lived in, specifically two pretty evil people, the pastor and the associate pastor, the youth pastor. And I won't go into it here at this point, but I was searching for God. I was searching for some sort of meaning to life, and I just couldn't grasp it. And so I'd read this book by Thich Nhat Hanh, Jesus and Buddha as Brothers, I think is the title. And book blew me away. I mean, it really opened my eyes to a different perspective of, if you've always been told that the sky is blue and it will always be blue, and anyone that says that it's any different is wrong, well, then the sky is always going to be blue. How can it be anything else? And so that was my mindset with Christianity until I read this book. And then it just opened a whole portal for me and changed the trajectory of my life. A book by Pema Chodron, was what made me become a Buddhist practitioner. And I think I think that book also, it was a big reason why I started in the hospice too. It's called uh, I I'm gonna mess this up. It's What to Do When Things Fall Apart.
Mhm.
Um, but that was pretty paramount. And there are different Buddhist organizations that you could write, like a Tricycle and Lion's Roar, and they'll give you a free year subscription if you're in prison, so that you can have Buddhist materials, and they'll give you a list of places that offer services to Buddhists. Um, and so I had found my Lama in one of those magazines. That is also how I found um, the Zen Center. I had written because they were talking about educational programs for contemplative care. And at that time, I was going through my ordination process, which was a 3.5 year journey. And I was trying to gather anything that I could to digest and to really to set with me. I didn't have any formal training with hospice in, you know, a social setting as far as like the healthcare unit. I have my practice. And so if I was going to be the best that I could for anyone else, I was going to try to take in as much information as I could. Chodo, who's an amazing man, also snubbed my letter and passed it to Yakusan gratefully, because Yakusan has really been a pillar in my life and my biggest cheerleader, I think. Um, but that's how I met Yakusan, and how the Buddhist path had became about for me. It was a place where I was able to find peace. I was able to find acceptance. I was able to find no judgment. Not that there aren't any in other religions. I just hadn't had a chance to have that opportunity to find it. Um, so,
So the Inside Outside Study Group is a group that Pema and I co-founded. Um, at the time, Pema was teaching a meditation class in prison that had a waiting list. There were 50 people already in the class, and there was a waiting list to get in the class. So Pema had a Sangha, which, for those who might not be familiar, is it's a community of people. So Pema had a Sangha, and I had a Sangha. And as our friendship grew, we saw an opportunity to connect the Sanghas, to connect people on Pema's side and connect people on my side. And what developed and what is developing is our written exchanges between incarcerated people and people on the outside. This is not a mentoring program, it's really a writing exchange, partnerships that form, uh, offering exchange of emotional and spiritual support. Sometimes there's study, people are reading books together, and sometimes just writing letters. And pretty amazing relationships can form, not always. Um, and uh, and it it again, it's something, that level of care penetrates through walls. And it's pretty. I'm amazed at how the group has grown. We're about at this point there are about, I can't remember the exact number. I think it might be over 30 pairs writing each other, um, prisons across the states. And for anyone here who doesn't know this, there's a network of organizations where writing exchanges happen and various inside-outside support groups happen. So,
Yox, if I could for a second, I know we're
yeah,
getting short of time.
yeah.
One of the things that really touched me about my connection with Yakusan is she was always very encouraging when she would write me. Always, well, how can we do this? And you're doing such a great job. And so I would come back and I would tell her about the classes that I would teach. And that meditation class, people knew that it was somebody from the LGBTQ community that was leading the class and teaching, and they came, which was a very but the thing that I'm most proud of was what I would like to in society is it didn't matter what your race was or what your gang was or what identity what gender you identified as, anything like that. Everybody in there got along so well. And I would tell her about these guys and watching the light pop on behind these guys' eyes when they would catch something, learn something. And you could start to see this hope that was building back up inside of them because it was gone. They felt that no one in the world cared about them. And Yax came up with this. She and her sangha had donated this beautiful tanka for the meditation class. And it opened up a forum for a conversation about, what if we do this? And I was like, man, that's a really great idea. I know this person, this person, this person, this person. And slowly I was able to see these guys' lives transform just because someone cared. It wasn't about something romantic. It wasn't about something financial or about gifts. It was about a human connection. And these guys had lost that. So when I exited prison, I was then enveloped within the outside study group from the outside as well. And hey, let me tell you, we have a meeting once a month. I wasn't able to go this month here, but the kindest, sweetest, genuine, loving people, and a lot of them I see their face right now that are attending. The most amazing group, I'm sorry, Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation, but that I've ever seen. These are amazing group of human beings, and I'm so grateful to have the opportunity and the blessing to know them.
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much for that. I wanted to mention also this, I don't know why I didn't say this at the beginning, but the one prison hospice program that's a licensed program in California was actually started because Elisabeth Kübler-Ross called a mutual friend, and said to her, the work that you've done with AIDS patients at San Francisco General is the same work that needs to be done in prisons. There's so many people dying of AIDS right now. This is 1984. Find a local prison and start to support them. And so she found a prison in Vacaville, California that had an AIDS support program, AIDS support groups. And she went up there, and it became pretty clear pretty quickly that while that program, she could manage it, it would be better to have a more balanced approach to it. And she called some friends of hers, a husband and wife team, and they went up and started supporting the men in that unit. And over time, that developed, they realized all of these people are dying, and what really needs to be here is a hospice program. So Elisabeth actually was responsible for the first prison hospice program in the US, and being able to offer programming like this through the foundation just feels like coming full circle, Pema. So thank you. And I'm so grateful for the community that you had, that you created inside, but also the inside outside community that you've been received so beautifully as a returning person. There are a couple of other questions here. One comment, and this is from Sandra Fish, who is also the co-founder of the Humane Prison Hospice Project. And she says, thank you so much, Pamela. What you have given of yourself has touched more people and communities than is possible to know. I thank you, as this is something that is in my bones. I feel that when you give your heart away, or pieces of your heart away, you can hear your heart more clearly, is what I think. And I send love. Sandy, do you want to say anything? You could unmute yourself if you wanted to.
I guess I will now. I'm here. First of all, I love you. I absolutely love you. And listening to you, this is something that has been in my bones, and the importance of this work in the prison with people dying and having someone there has been mysteriously strong for me. So listening to you and getting that power of how important it is and how it affects our communities and their families. And so it was good to get your word and your spirit tonight. So thank you so much. It's just really, really incredible. Thank you, Susan, for this. It's really a lovely, lovely boost, even though I'm weeping. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandy. Thanks so much. And then James has said, what did you learn about interdependence through paying attention to the minute details of plants and gardening?
Thank you, James. So the very first thing you learn about in the Buddhist practice, for me, and in gardening too, is the cycle of life. Things begin and things end. In the plant world, you have your annuals that grow, and they're with you for a season. They're beautiful and they're bright and they're shiny, and then they go into permanent wilt. But they soon become fertilizer for the next generation who wouldn't survive without it. And it brings me back to life again, because who would we be without someone that was older that helped enrich our lives, right? And so then my Lama started giving me teachings about interdependence and Indra's net, and how we're all interconnected. I don't care what your race is or your religion, sexual identity, or orientation. We're part of each other. That too is a part of that cycle. And taking down the minute details, watching the growth, measuring them, measuring the value of the light that's coming through at various hours, so that I can be sure what was optimum growth and what wasn't. Help me take some sort of control of my life too. Those plants were depending on me to survive, yet I was depending on them. How much more so, or how much more plainly can life be said than we need each other? Hope that helped.
Thank you. Gian is asking, how has your Buddhist practice changed since re-entry, if it has?
Ooh, Pema looks frozen all of a
Well,
sudden.
Emma does look frozen.
In a
Again,
great pose,
here
though.
comes the nose.
Oh, okay, you were frozen for a moment, but now you're not. So perfect.
Sorry. Sandra, thank you again. You made me tear up again. Made my nose start running. I still love you though. Thank you for your kindness. Thank you for your time, for listening. Thank you for staying up late, wherever you're at across the world. Thank you for listening to my story and my friendship with Yaku-san, and how it's started from this. Now we have built a foundation, and we have the privilege of sitting on this very stage. So thank you.
Thank you so much. How has your Buddhist practice, if it has, how has it changed since re-entry?
Oh, Gian, thank you. I knew it was you. you have no idea what you're walking out of. Yaku-san has laughed at me so much about my phone because I was clueless. I'm still clueless. But there are a lot of other things that they don't give you before you leave. They don't tell you the blows that are going to come. They don't tell you the things that you're going to be facing. Don't prepare you. But I had my practice. My practice was my ground, and sometimes I got swayed from that ground, but I didn't fall. And that was because I was able to reconnect every moment with the breath, with the Sangha. I do this thing, I hope it's okay for me to say, I do this thing usually 10 times a day. I call them mini meditations. And this is what has kept me grounded today. Mini meditations are at least 10 times a day. I will see something that I think is unusual, interesting, beautiful, horrendous, whatever it is, and I'll try to stay with it for 10 rotations of the breath. In, out, 1. In, out, 2. And being with that, not only does it break my day because we go through this automated system of going about our daily lives, it provides a break from that routine, but it also gives you a chance to connect with whatever you were looking at, to see it more deeply, to see it more clearly, and it gives you a chance to reconnect with the breath in yourself. Right, so it's a reminder to pay attention to things that are around you. Pay attention to you. Take time to breathe. And so doing this 10 times a day, it may seem a bit excessive at first, but then you get into the routine of it, and you don't really realize how vibrant a brown leaf can be, or just how amazing the sun looks when it's shining just off of the dew of that grass. Or maybe how mom's hair is first thing in the morning. You know, you don't realize the perfection of it and how amazing it is. But if you sit with it, you really sit with it and you take it all in for those 10 rotations of the breath, then it's easier to step forward. And so, Jian, with your question, having that foundation, having that break from routine, because it's not a scheduled time. It's whenever I see something that's there. That has helped provide continuity and a foundation in a way that I would have been sincerely shaken had I not had. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne.
Yes, a couple of people here are just thanking you here for sharing your story with us, your loving kindness to those around you, your time with those dying in and out of prison. I look forward to reading the book. And Adriana says the same. Thank you for sharing your story. You have a great heart and so much wisdom. Your patients are so lucky to have you. You're doing an amazing work. God bless you. There was somebody that is there any way we can get the book in India? I believe that you can go to amazingpetunias.com and order it, and they will mail it to you. And by they, I mean probably Yucatan.
Not so. Not so. I also send them out as well.
Okay, and Pema, either one of these two people will send it to you in India, Shyam. Yes, so you're welcome to do that. There was a question about somebody noticed the doula's hospice part, the doula's part up there, and I'm encouraging them to talk to each other about that, since we're not really focused so much on doulas here. Pema, I was curious, are you considering, it sounds like you have a pretty busy life on the outside here, are you considering volunteering with a hospice local to you where you are now, or is that work really more just
So
so-
it didn't stop
Yeah.
on this side of the prison walls. I've yet to engage in that fact. Right now, I work a full-time job uh, at Walgreens, and next week I'm actually becoming a manager and working towards a certification in the pharmacy. I also serve at a cafe, and as of the second, I have an interview for Memorial Behavioral Health to be an executive assistant that will work in tandem with the Walgreens job so that I won't have to miss any hours or schedules. But remember in the beginning when I was talking about going into the room, your head has to be right and your heart has to be right. I've only been out just over 3 months.
Mhm.
I need to get my heart right and I need to get my head right before I walk into that room again. But I will walk in again. I would like to take time. A lot of people have seen a lot of love and stuff, but I would not be here. This book would not have been published. Maybe never would have been if it weren't for Yakusan. If there were any sort of support that you tie yourself down to, it's Yakusan. She's been my greatest cheerleader. She has pushed me. Um, sometimes pissed me off, but that's part of that love. She is an amazing force of nature, and everyone should have your own yaks. Trust me. Um, but also, please extend your heart and your love to Yaku-san as well, because if it weren't for her, I wouldn't be here, right? So thank you sincerely.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you so much. Well, we are down to our last 2 minutes here. So I just want to give you, if either of you want to say anything just before we go, and I will put up both the website where you'll be able to get the book, and then also I'll put up a place where if people would like to make a donation. Actually, I think why don't we just put up the book tonight? So if people would like to make a donation, we'll be able to support your re-entry and work that you're doing here on the outside. Pamela, when you were just talking, I was asking about the volunteering with hospice. I know as a volunteer coordinator, we had to do a background check, and if people came back with a felony, then we had to go through a whole rigmarole around whether or not they could volunteer. So I was asking in part to see, kind of if that's still the case, if that's anything that you've run up against, and some work that we're trying to do with Humane with the people that we'll be training, in the hopes that they'll be able to do work on the outside, as well as the work that they're doing inside. And that is our long-term goal.
Sure. So, in the state of Illinois, I'm not sure if it's the law of the land. If you have not been convicted in the past 7 years, they're not supposed to be able to hold your crime against you. This goes for work. This goes for volunteering. I faced the same thing when I went to register to volunteer at the Phoenix Center, which is the local LGBTQ center here in Springfield, Illinois. So here's the thing, legally, they're not supposed to be able to hold it against you for work or volunteering. Realistically, there is some sort of stigma, so there will have to be some sort of person that goes out on a limb or feels the need to have me there in order to push for me, because legally, yes, I can do it. It all depends on the organization and if they're willing to open their arms to me.
Thank you. Well, I just want to thank both of you so much for sharing first the book with us and then sharing tonight with us. It's really been wonderful. And as Sandy acknowledged earlier, I think it just really just really sort of, it just really resonates with me. This work that we're working on with Humane is invaluable. The work that you've done already without any sort of support for it is really, um, it's hard to imagine that in a prison, knowing the very little that I know about prison, that you're able to do something like that, just by the force of your good nature and you knowing that that's the right thing to do. So thank you so much. And it's been really beautiful, Yakusan, to have this time with you again. And, I'm curious if you could put something up, if there's people that are listening that would be interested in the Inside Out work that you're doing.
Sure, I'll put an email.
Yeah, an email address up there, that would be great. And we'll be winding down. I
And
can say,
Susan, thank you very much.
oh, you're
Very
very,
Really, I mean, you didn't know much about the project and you just went with it, and you
yes.
opened up this whole evening. So it's really very generous of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Yes. Like many of the best things in life. You don't really know anything about it. You just
Yeah.
head towards it.
Yeah.
So thank you all. I don't know. Thank you. There's the Inside Out ZenCare.org for people that would be interested. This is something that I'm very interested in once we have trained people in prison, is that they have contacts on the outside with people who do hospice work. And even though in prison it's very different circumstance, that there'll be some kind of support for people so they can write to each other and they know that they are well supported. So that's a project that is really, I'm very interested in myself. So thank you for this. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to keep this room open just for a couple of minutes after after the sort of formal part ends. I'm going to turn off the recording, and on behalf of the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation, we thank all of you who have joined us tonight, in particular, Pema, thank you, and Yakusan, thank you both so very much. And we're going to stop recording now, and it will let us know that's happened.